Can everybody please take a seat so we can move to the next part of our program here? Give a minute. Everybody just pour a cup of coffee and settle back. Thank you again for being with us here. We're going to move to the second phase of what we set out to do here. I think the governor did a very good job of teeing up the context of this, and I think in the course of his remarks, kept coming back to this notion that we've got to get a layer deeper here. We can talk about this on the policy issue. We can talk about it as a jobs issue. There are some abstractions to that, particularly for younger people. That's the top-down way of looking at this. I think now we've got some great folks with us here who can try to help us explore the bottom-up question. And it comes down to, ultimately teaching in the classroom and also inspiring through role models. And we have brought together a collection of folks here who I think can speak to all of those issues. You can see in the program there detailed biographies. Each of these are extremely accomplished people. But let me quickly sort of try to set the stage here. Anousheh Ansari, who is the first private woman in space, it's probably all you need to say, but is an entrepreneur in multiple technology areas, successful entrepreneur, I think, by definition, feels like a role model to me, so we work from there. Powell is running a very successful charter school in New York, comes up through the teaching ranks, mathematics teaching, is in the classroom. Marc Ecko is an extremely well-known designer who has used technology as a key part of his creations, and I think, again, fits in the role model world for John Engler saying his daughter really isn't interested in math, she's interested in fashion. Well, I wish we could have her here today, but I think that would be great. Linda Rosen, also a former math teacher, we're laden with math teachers here, which is a good thing, runs Change the Equation, which is a group of corporate entities that has come together to try to deal with some of the problems that the governor set out, creating some scale, creating some best practices. Felice Frankel is a professor at MIT, also in the role model category, does terrific research and work particularly in the use of photography in technology. Tom Luce is, as Becca Gould said at the beginning, one of the founding board members of Dell Computers, has taken his talents to establish and run the National Math Science Initiative. If you see in your packet, there's some terrific research that they've done in terms of trying to identify the demographics of what we're dealing with, and also with some very specific programs in schools, in Texas in particular, which I'd like Tom to talk about a little bit, to really get specific results out of individual schools. And Scott Baldridge, professor at LSU, proponent of math education and trying to make math more creative and rigorous, Singapore math being the kind of catchphrase of some of the books that Scott has written and have become very influential. So I think we've got all the parts of the discussion here, and I'm going to try to move it around a little bit and get folks to address some of these issues and hopefully interact with each other, and then we'll take some time to get your questions as we go forward. But I want to start with Tom, because we had a conversation a number of months ago when we started looking at this, Tom, and you said something that just stuck in my mind as an absolute cornerstone here, which is, how do you inspire? What you have to do is figure out a way to inspire young people to move in this direction. And where does that come from, and how do we get there?
Well, 9 times out of 10, it comes from the teacher in the classroom. And I think particularly in the STEM field, one of our concepts that we emphasize so much is you can't teach what you don't know, and we need more STEM teachers who really have content knowledge. If a teacher in the STEM field doesn't have that content knowledge, they may be able to stay ahead of their student one day at a time, but they're not going to make their eyes light up. And I think it's really critical, and we're replicating a program nationally in 33 universities that emphasizes this concept. One of them is at LSU, that entering freshmen enter the College of Natural Sciences in math and graduate with the same BS any other student does, but also a teaching certificate. And they go into the classroom and teach. The data is overwhelming that, you know, we have a huge turnover problem among all teachers, but we don't among content-trained teachers. 80% of our graduates are still teaching 5 years later. Why? They have the same working conditions, same salaries, but they persist because they're good at what they do. And so I think that's critical. And, you know, John referred to this chart. It might be a good thing for everybody to look at in this as we talk about this, because it's targeted. If you look on your table, you see here a great quadrant that shows the number of students who have high interest and high readiness. These are the students that are succeeding today, but that's only 16%. Well, look at this quadrant: high interest, low readiness. So we don't have to worry about engaging those. What we have to worry about is getting them a good teacher. Then in the lower side, low interest, high readiness. There you have to focus on engagement. So I think we need to target segments of the population and really focus on what do we need to do and what are the proven programs that work.
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Just as an example of the program, we have at LSU, it's at University of Texas, it's called UTeach, and at LSU, it's called Go Teach.
Spelled a particular Cajun way.
Yeah, it's spelled Cajun, G-E-A-U-X, Go Teach. And we have seen phenomenal. I just wanted to say, as an example of one of these programs, when we moved the program out of the College of Ed and into the College of Science, we saw we were only graduating 5 to 10 students a year as math teachers. When we pulled it over into the College of Science, that was the marketing tool. It jumped to 50. And it was basically, and we got better students because now they could see, if I went and became a mathematician, I could get that math degree. I also got the certificate. I'm going to be okay when I leave. Maybe I want to go on to graduate school in mathematics. Maybe I want to go into something else. And some of our students do that. But now they've got both. And just that one marketing, it's almost like a little marketing trick that spawned this huge interest.
So all you marketing majors out there, you do still have a future just to
definitely
get jobs for the science majors. So I want to stay on that theme of inspiration for a minute because I think it applies. And I'm going to ask anybody who feels willing to step up here. I can tell you what inspired me to get out of math and science, but that's a different story. Let me start, Marc, ask you, what inspired you in the math science world?
Oh, I don't know that I looked at the potpourri of my education through the lens of, you know, math or science or any of these one vocations or one silos. I think one of the dilemmas in this conversation, and I think one of the other great avenues to deploy those marketing tricks that you relate to, is instead of having a conversation about STEM, having a conversation around STEAM. You know, I don't know if you guys have heard John Madia, president of Rhode Island School of Design, talking about science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And it's not what you make, it's how you make people feel. And I think as an onboarding mechanism to get young folks and a more diverse, broader group of folks contemplating the sciences, you could use artfulness in both how you present and how you onboard. Because to say making science cool is kind of like saying making Beyonce beautiful. We all know she's beautiful. It's like saying making Zuckerberg rich. We all know Mark Zuckerberg's rich. Right? Kids know and young people know science is sufficiently cool. I mean, we all saw Star Wars, right? The question is the content side of the house. And hearing the governor talk about it and these data points that you're referring to, the question to me is, how do you productize this content issue? How did we get here to suddenly be like, oh, shit, people don't know how to, they have a degree, but they don't know the content. Where has the breakdown happened?
Can I talk. Can I make?
Yeah, please, Stella, I want you to,
As
please
you're
feel free to
bringing,
jump
you're
in.
bringing in art. I'm not an artist. By the way, I'm not a professor. That we have to be formal. In academia, we have to be honest. So I'm not called a professor. We should say that. The whole notion of seeing is what I'm getting very granular in how I think, but it is how I became in love with science. It's about looking and seeing and realizing that every single thing around you is about science. You just don't know it's science. But the idea is to get us to look and see. And that's why when John was talking about bringing in art, I would prefer to bring in design because the artist has some agenda. But anyway, so for example, you see this bottle that I'm seeing that it has imprinted on it Saratoga in white. With my science background, what I am imagining is that how did they print that? How did they technically get that print on the bottle? And does that have something to do with the way we are now printing cells on substrates to create tissues, which we are doing all over now? You scientists and I hope policymakers know that we are creating organs on substrates by printing. There is a connection between what we see around us and what is happening in the laboratory. My focus is to get young people to look, to draw, very low tech, by the way, to make pictures, to ask questions about what they're looking at. And at the same time, bringing in designers, and I'll stop in a second, but this is very exciting for us. We've developed workshops where we have science students and design students working together to make representations of scientific concepts. Can you imagine the small group of the science students teaching the design students and the design students teaching the science students of how to visually communicate what the science is? This is a way of engaging each other, in not only engaging people in different disciplines, but engaging each other from different cultures. It's in pictures. It's in that language where we could talk together. I'll stop.
Yeah, Linda, please.
I hesitate to talk from anecdote, but let me at least start with an anecdote. I'm about to display my age, but when Sputnik went up and the federal government put a lot of money into new curriculum in science and math, because we got to beat the Russians, many of these programs were piloted, and I was in a pilot new math course, 7th grade. I walked in the first day. Now, it's true they violated all the rules of educational research. We were handpicked. We were the kids who were at the very top of our class in 6th grade. But apart from that, I walked in the first day of school, and the teacher was teaching us binary numbers. She blew my mind when she showed me that 1 plus 1 actually equaled what looked like 1, 0. And I understood it completely. But it was such a way of taking a truth that I thought I knew and looking at it from a new lens, and helped me so significantly understand place value. This is one day. I came home and I said, well, I know what I'm going to be, just based on that experience. Now, I use that little anecdote only to show you that we never know what's going to inspire a kid in any one day or any one experience. So we have to drench their lifetime experiences in and out of school. We have far too little time on science, in particular, in elementary school, partly as fallout from No Child Left Behind focus on mathematics, though that's very important, and English language arts. We have teachers, as we've talked about, the really important role of teachers. We heard earlier about guidance counselors who are not often sufficiently well versed in the fact that most every career that pays a living wage requires scientific and numerical literacy. Just about every single job that there is. So you don't have to think of yourself as a chemist or a biologist or a physicist or a mathematician, looking at my colleagues here. But in fact, most everything requires that you have that deep knowledge. The out-of-school community is really latching on to STEM in significant ways. Sesame Street's this season is focused on STEM learning, and that's certainly getting a younger group preschool, and they are really trying to represent that. The 4-H Club, which is one of the largest youth organizations in the country, has STEM as its basic background. So what we have to do as a matter of deliberate intention is continually expose youngsters to STEM without saying, oh, this is science, it's important. This is mathematics, you have to learn it. We have to imbue it in their everyday experiences and their learning, and I'll stop there.
Good, yeah. Paul?
I think for me, you know, math, I fell in love with math because the feedback loop is so short. You learn something, you practice it, you get it wrong, you practice it some more, you get it right. And I think for students and in great math teachers' classrooms, that's what drives success, and success breeds interest. And so when you look at that upper left quadrant, you know, I don't believe those students are having that success or seeing the challenge, engaging with the challenge, persevering, and then realizing that feeling. And I think great math teachers do that. And so for me as a principal, we look for those great teachers. And I think about, Tom, your remarks about, you know, you can't teach content that you don't know. It's certainly true. You know, on a very small scale, we've started a math teacher fellowship where we take recent college grads who have a hard science background in math or chemistry or biology and train them to be teachers. Because you can't train deep content knowledge after undergraduate, but you can train teaching technique. And so one of our master teachers, in fact, came through that program, and she is unlocking that passion in our students every day. Right now, actually, she's teaching.
You raised a big issue, Paul, which is from the teacher community, right? There's a wide disparity of standards of what it takes to be a math teacher or a science teacher, right? Tom, have you?
Well, yes, and we are addressing part of that with content and also making states change their certificate procedures, because we really need to do that, and I think that's a tremendous focus. But I want to go back to what Governor Engler said, because I think it's important in this context of what we're talking about, is that we all have an obligation to focus on the fact that whatever the best ideas are, we have to take them to national scale. Let's don't forget, in our K-12 system, we have 50 million children in our public schools, 50 million. So I'm all for a program that helps 1,000 students. That's wonderful for those 1,000 students. But we've got to take things to scale that help 50 million. And you can't cure the national competitiveness problem. You can't cure structural unemployment unless you take things to scale. And that means the discipline to say, as John Engler was saying, we've got to stop right now and say, okay, what do we know today? Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And let's replicate what we know works today, at least on scale. We can continue to have a continuous improvement feedback, but we've got to start taking these things to scale. And I think the way we're doing that is with private-public partnerships. We cut across geographic lines, local districts, state lines, all of that, by giving matching grants and making the school step up with contributions, the state step up with contributions, but matching the private sector. And we're in 20 states, we'll be in 33 universities, 350 high schools. You've got to prove you can do it on a national scale, and that it works in every kind of school. And that's what we desperately need.
Anousheh, I want to get to you, because I think we're talking about this inspiration question, and finish your thoughts on that, because you're doing it you're not doing it just personally, but you are looking to inspire more broadly. Tell us about your experience.
I think it's important for us to think about how can we inspire people through their imagination. And I think sometimes with the way we teach in public schools especially, we try to box people's thinking. And when we box them, we limit their imagination. And for me personally, I was fascinated by the stars. I mean, it was a very simple, passion for night sky, stargazing and looking at the stars and wanting to know more about it. And in order to know more about it, I had to ask questions, learn more about what they are, and that's how my interest in math and science started. But we don't have a lot of these things happening today, and for each person is different. So we have to find different topics and bring those to the classroom or take the students out of the classroom in different environments to expose them to many things. And for each person, their imagination and their interest may be sparked by different things. In order to get them going, I think we need to start in middle school. It's much harder to inspire a high school student or a college student, but it's much easier. And I think if we get them interested, if we get them hooked in middle school, then the chances are that they will continue as they go through the school system.
Does that, Marc, I want to ask you, and Linda, Sesame Street, maybe the problem's solved. If Sesame Street's on the case, maybe we've made some progress. Is that the sort of thing that you think has to happen? Is the media and the entertainment world and the art world, are they where we have to really gain some ground here?
Yeah, look, I think, we talk about scale, and one of the ways to kind of run the interference when you're dealing with the well-intended local control issues, like the governor brought up before, is that often scale is a very hard thing to get to when you think about the notion of how long we use data to prove that something is effective, right? In the educational sector, I've heard people say, well, we have the data. It's been 10 years. We have the data. But in the private sector, you're moving in a much quicker iterative loop. So by the time you've caught up to the data to deploy something to scale, there's been a cultural psychological shift at the consumer level. So, the big kind of heads up, and one of the roles, I think, of media, private sector, is that, look, this technology age, for better or worse, is going to, I think, in this great country with all these diverse thinkers and creators and innovators, is going to drive to these solutions. If it's the Sesame Streets of the world, which I think are a small piece of it, or the Facebooks of the world saying, you know what, this is an opportunity to monetize. And if you look at the music industry, folks, if you look at publishing, technology has cratered industries, right? So there has to be this kind of hyper-awareness that if the well-intended local guys on the ground can't think larger to scale, we can't just have a cosmetic issue of scale. It's kind of like having a broadcast network and saying, like, we're, nothing's going to rate higher than the Jay Leno show, at the 11:30 hour. You don't take and do, a Menlo Park, New Jersey version of the Jay Leno show. There's a reason Jay, that's scale, okay? And I think, the private sector will challenge this.
We're not talking about local people taking things to scale. What we're talking about is corporations focusing and philanthropy focusing on.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that over the last
finding
years.
local programs
there's been a lot of
that go to national.
For 10 years, I've spent probably about a third of my income, and I'm not Bill Gates rich, but I've done pretty good. And I've used a lot of my income trying to fight this fight. And I could tell you, building curriculum products, where it's kind of like building the ultimate Dyson vacuum and not having a shelf to sell it on. Okay? So even when you find the solutions, if the evidence is only anecdotal, or if it's not up to the certain rigor or the standard, if it can't be measured by this rubric or this standard, it can't scale. And then what it becomes is a nice after-school program.
Well, but we're scaling today in producing first-year results that are 85% increases in states very diverse, some of them heavily union, some not heavily union, and we're scaling in 1 year.
Yeah,
and you can do that.
We're saying the same thing here, but
Yeah.
to be clear, the point I'm trying to articulate is that philanthropy and private sector, there's only so much tolerance they have to keep banging their head in the wall over and over again. Right? It's kind of like what do they say, definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, right? So there's a certain point that the folks on the ground at the local level have to start being less xenophobic, oh, it's my kids are good. Those kids are the problem. You know, it's all of us, folks, right? Yeah. And scale is something that if we really want to have a sober conversation about it, be prepared to be uncomfortable a little bit in your own skin. That's all.
I hope we got it. This is getting very. First, we're going to get you guys together. I got to get back to you on one point.
I just want to add to Marc's comments that I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but you're saying in order to bring things to scale, let's just break the box.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Well, but think outside the box.
I would have said that.
Okay. Well,
I didn't say that.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough. But think outside the box.
Yes.
And understand that we can reach our children in vastly different ways than we could 20 years ago.
Sure.
So, for example, whether we like it or not, almost every kid in America has an Xbox or a PS2
or some
PS3,
mobile device.
There's a PS3 now. Some mobile device that we could show them things that they would be excited about that, you know, without them knowing it, would be teaching them some mathematics.
Right.
Sneaky, yeah.
In order here, Felice, you had a thought, and then I'm going to ask Linda.
The notion of scalability is critical, of course, but what has to go along with this, and I say this very unfortunately, and forgive me if I insult some of you, but what goes along with that is evaluation. That in every attempt to scale things, that is, i.e. getting more funding, you have to show by numbers. And the evaluators who are now deciding, there's a whole new profession of evaluators. And obviously I have my problems with that, otherwise I wouldn't be bringing it up. But
I'll back you up.
No, thank you. It's driving us crazy because, for example, we have what we consider, and all of the faculty involved with our Picturing to Learn program. We had a program for undergrads. We wanted to bring it to middle and high school. We're asking students to draw what they are learning in order to teach their mothers, or that is to bring in the generations, you know. And what we're finding is their misconceptions. It's incredibly exciting. Go on our website, www.picturingtolearn.org. I am paying for it myself because I couldn't get more funding, and that's what I'm getting at. The evaluators, because we wanted to continue to bring the Picturing to Learn program, we did not have control studies. Why didn't we have control studies? Because the faculty, the teachers, wanted to bring this program into the classroom. They didn't want to have a group without the intervention. I'm learning all this language, you know. I'm not a cognitive psychologist. So we didn't have formal data. It wasn't formalized because we did not have the balanced contrast with the control group. We are convinced we're onto something, actually very simple. Making a representation clarifies your thinking as you are making the representation. This is nothing brilliant. This is what I do all the time. I make pictures. In order for me to understand how to make a really good picture, I have to understand the science behind it. Okay.
I would claim that scientists in general think that way.
Scientists think that way. But the point I'm getting at is I couldn't get more funding because I didn't have the right control study. I don't know what to do. I mean, I meaning we, our group. We're going now. That's NSF. NSF won't touch it at this point. Maybe there are new program offices around. But here, we had a wonderful program funded by NSF. But because the evaluators told us that we didn't have a formalized group, it ain't fundable, and therefore not scalable. What do we do about evaluation?
Well, I think that plays to some things Linda has in mind.
So there are several comments I'm going to try to pick up on and hopefully weave together. You're absolutely right that the corporate community has been very generous in their philanthropy. The members of Change the Equation, over 110 companies alone, and that's not the whole corporate community, Marc, we have to talk, invest well north of $500 million a year in pre-K-12 STEM learning. In school, it's mostly math and science. Out of school, it's more STEM related. And they are frustrated. That's a lot of money and not a lot of results. So if you're thinking about being a scientist and collecting data, and I mean that sort of in a generic sense, you'd have to assume that not all the programs are equally effective because the needle hasn't moved sufficiently. So part of the reason that these companies came together to form Change the Equation, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, was to help them be more strategic in their philanthropy. And their sort of drumbeat is of the whole proliferation of programs, and frankly, everyone and their aunt and uncle have STEM in their name and are promising and are using all the buzzwords and are promising to deliver nirvana for kids. In this whole plethora of programs, how do we, the corporate community, recognize quality? And there must be a small number, and quality counts for us more than quantity, because we're real worried about the return on our investment. And in identifying a small number, and I don't know how many hands I need for that small number, but it's not quantity, it's quality. And yes, we do need some notion that we will get results. So that's sort of the other side of the evaluation and the accountability. One of the strengths of the No Child Left Behind Act was it said we can no longer wallpaper holes in our learning. All those youngsters who are not really succeeding, we have to figure out, we have to recognize them. And that's the beauty of disaggregation of data. And may we never lose that going forward, no matter what happens in the reauthorization of ESEA. So I think we do need to assure any investment, public or private, that there's a high likelihood that it's going to be effective, because we have such a long history of not. And the only other thing I would say, it seems to me that the other thing the corporate community does need to do is use its sense on R&D. And that is, you are not doing good R&D unless some of your ideas end up in the trash can. So I think a portion of a philanthropic portfolio has to be out of the box, out of the universe. Marc introduced himself as from Mars, has to come from Mars.
Anousheh, you've been to Mars, so you can, you can comment.
I wish. I'd like to also pick on what Marc said and agree with him. We definitely have lots of programs with data showing that they're very successful. But still, even the ones that are successful and have all the data, they are not being, they can't grow to scale. There's not an acceptance.
No marketplace.
No marketplace for it. And then, you know, they get frustrated after a while. It's like, I've been banging my head. I can show the data. It's been successful. It's being run in 5 schools, but it cannot go beyond that. And that's the problem we need to solve. And it has nothing to do with the teachers or the student. It has to do with the way we run things. And going back also to what he talked about, by the time the program is implemented and it's working, we have all the data, it may be 10 years. We now live in exponential times. Things move very rapidly. They change rapidly. The tools that they use to teach math, for example, can be improved 10 times, if not more, after 10 years. So there's an obsolescence that comes with it if we take this tactic of using 10 years in order to approve anything, to even consider it to taking it scale.
Paul,
we need to change.
Marc and Anousheh, both in the private sector, both making that point that things are moving very fast out there. How does that translate to the classroom for you?
Well, that's exactly why we need different teaching tools, because by the time a college student graduates, 1/3 of the information they've studied is obsolete. So we cannot continue teaching people the same way we taught before. We cannot use textbooks and old methods of teaching. We need to get more interactive. We need to have up-to-date data coming into the classroom real time. We can't rely on old material and just continue teaching the same material from 10 years ago.
Paul, then I want to ask Scott on that, because they're in the classroom experience. Do you feel that pressure? Do you think there's a problem there?
For us in Uncommon Schools, R&D for us looks like finding our best teachers, studying them, videotaping them, interviewing them, talking to them, and then creating professional development on very narrowly focused objectives that allows us to then turn that around to take a novice teacher or even a good teacher and make them great. And what we're finding is that there isn't a secret sauce to, there's no secret recipe. You're not born a teacher. But there are discrete skills that master teachers use that more novice teachers can learn. And so I'd say that that's the R&D that we're doing. And I think it's scalable. I think it's hard, though, because it's different than my training looked when I was a master's candidate in education. And I think it's different than a lot of our programs look.
Well, you raise an interesting point. I mean, you come out of a Teach for America background. This issue of scalability is a big one that's out there. I don't know if anyone's read Steve Brill's book which is interesting, and Steve does a very interesting narrative through the New York City school system, and he's somewhat critical of Randy Weingarten, who's the head of AFT. He's a big player in that. But by the end of the book, he's kind of come full circle, and he says he's come to the conclusion that you can't do this without teachers' unions. You cannot get the scale of quality teachers that, the great teachers that TFA is being able to produce. Do you think that is that the kind of scale we still have to have, a 3 million teacher union to succeed?
I think we have great teachers, and I think we can learn from them, and I think we can share those out, and I think teachers want to be great. And I think it's easy to talk about what you need to do, but it's hard to implement from talk. But if you can watch a great teacher, and you can watch a 30-second clip of a great teacher describing breaking down a math content objective, a new teacher can say, I can do that. Yeah. And in fact, they can learn from that and turn it around. So I'd say that that's, to me, the key. We have those bright spots out there. And so our next step is how do we help train the teacher force at large.
But Brian, there are policy levers that can do what Marc's talking about and what we're all talking about in scaling. And that is, the federal government right now spreads most of their money out on formula. Every school gets X amount of dollars for every child in poverty, et cetera. We could instead say we're going to have a portion of our money go if you do these types of programs. In other words, we could incentivize schools to do what works. And so there are policy levers that can, if we just have the courage to do it. When I was in Washington, the Department of Education, we did a cabinet-level study of all the math and science programs the federal government funded that was supposed to help STEM in K through 12. There were 129 programs. 126 had not been evaluated in any way. 3 had. Of those 3, 2 had produced negative results and 1 had produced positive results. And we were spending $3.5 billion a year. And that was a small drop in the bucket compared to the formula funding. So if we have the courage to step out and say, well, yes, we're going to give you more money if you do X, we'll give you more money if you hire a teacher who's content trained, you can produce scale. So it's not, I mean, my thesis is it's not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible.
Scott, I wanted to get back to you on this teaching question. And also, a separate question is, when we talk about math and science, we loop them together, but they're not really the same thing. I mean, they're taught differently, right? And when you guys talk about the changing nature of science, et cetera, I don't think math changes all that much. And that's what, I think part of where you're coming from is a very fundamentalist perspective here. There's certain things people just have to learn.
Well, in order to appreciate science,
right.
Math is the language by which science expresses itself. So you have to know math before you get to the science. Well, you have to know math before you can express it. Going back to the teaching, we did a it's now in its 4th year project, and we've been doing things like that, what Paul is suggesting, where we try to imitate the best teachers, and we've you know, get our hands on everything. Teach Like a Champion is fantastic. You know, this books that help teachers internalize ideas about what it means to be good teaching. But one of the big bright spots for us was actually data collection. And one of the things that could be put to scale on a reasonable level is what do I mean by data collection? So what we did was our project literally turned into this big data center for the schools. They were helping the teachers administer quizzes every Thursday. We were helping grade those quizzes. We were giving feedback to the teachers based on, you know, 40% of your students were getting this problem wrong, so we really need for you to go after that problem again or that idea, and then turning it around and giving it back to the teachers in a very, it's the exact opposite of what we think of in terms of assessment, where we're going to just assess the whole school and, you know, put a big plus sign or a big minus sign. Here we're talking about relevant data right there, right at the fingertips for the teacher in a helpful way that helps them continue on with the profession. And that's been very, very helpful for the teachers. And that's something that we could very potentially make make available for a large number of teachers.
I want to stay with you one more minute, Scott, because part of what you're talking about, particularly in math, is a pretty rigorous structure of people needing to learn this stuff. I mean, math is, you just learn it. I look at, we look at some of the international competition examples, and you think of the Korean cram schools where the mother's got the kid by the collar and sending him Saturday morning, go learn your math, and you're going to go to an extra cram school on Tuesday. And we don't have that even in the culture here, right?
No, yeah, that's a problem for our culture.
Is that essential to learning something like a fundamental math?
You need the mom and dad on board, and the nice thing is that most of the time moms and dads are, they do have problems, but if you give them a chance to help their children, they rise to the challenge.
The media can help on two issues that have to do with our culture, and that is...
Don't get me involved.
Okay, I understand. But number one, it is socially acceptable in this country to say, I cannot balance my checkbook. And it should not be socially acceptable to say you can't balance your checkbook. Nobody would say they can't read. They wouldn't come up to you and say, hey, I can't read. But we feel okay in saying we can't balance our checkbook. And number two, we also have to get across that we need a STEM literate population. We aren't just talking about mathematicians and scientists and artists. We're talking about, to hold a living wage job today, you must be STEM capable. And we must explain that to the parents. The equivalent of the automobile assembly line job of 40 years ago, a job you could have and support a family, have a living wage, have benefits, the equivalent of that today is working on the chip factory floor at Intel. That requires a community college degree in semiconductor manufacturing. You have to be computer literate. You have to read technical manuals. Everybody has to be proficient in algebra if you're going to hold a living wage job. And we need to talk about that. I would love for us to see, we convinced the public that every child in elementary school needed to read. Our next challenge is we need to convince the entire country that every child must conquer Algebra 2, at a minimum, because if you're going to have critical thinking skills and have a living wage job, you have to have conquered algebra.
If I could add to that.
Can we say calculus?
Okay.
Up in the
Let's
ante
just start.
already.
I'd say calculus in high school and algebra in middle school.
Don't call it calculus, that's the key.
Well,
That stopped me.
okay.
Yeah.
Can I make just one comment? Because I think it's fascinating to think about the culture piece. I've been studying our best teachers in uncommon schools and going out and kind of sharing their best practices, calling it, great math lessons. What do great math teachers do? And one of the things that the best math teachers, some math teachers who are, whose students are ranking in the top 20 in terms of intermediate test scores in New York State. Their students are practicing a ton. They're not afraid of building automaticity and then teaching concept. And so I think we have there's some terminology that, is pejorative in terms of that practice, drill and kill, things like that. But I wouldn't say it's drill and kill, it's drill and then master, and then get to higher mastery. And so I think, we can't be afraid to practice and get our kids there. We do double time in math, so it's 2 hours a day, and it's made a huge difference. You got to do the right thing with those 2 hours. But I think that can go a long way in terms of, the balancing of the checkbook, but then what's beyond.
Yeah. Linda.
So there's research that came out just this summer that showed our cultural problem doesn't just happen when the adults are saying, I can't do math, or when those of us who can do math at a cocktail party happen to mention that's what our field is, and all of a sudden people find someone else to talk to, which has happened, I'm sure, to several folks in this room. But this research showed that girls as young as 2nd grade said, I don't do math, even when their scores were equivalent to or better than boys in the same class. So this whole issue of gender identity with mathematics, which we think of as the queen of the sciences, not the handmaiden of the sciences, 2 famous quotes about mathematics, starts really, really early. And we have to figure out a way to combat that. And I don't have an easy answer for that, but the researcher, Andrew Meltzoff from University of Washington, has a postdoc this October, going to Singapore, which is, of course, one of the countries that's beating our pants off in mathematics in particular. And when you go to Singapore and you say, do you think girls are good at math? And the answer, well, which girl? I mean, they have no generalization that it's a gender issue. It might be an individual issue. And what this research hopefully is going to begin to help us understand is that there are other cultures where this is not a belief, which is frankly pervasive in this country. I was at the White House yesterday for an announcement about a new NSF initiative trying to make the workplace friendlier, particularly for females, and a better work-life effectiveness balance. And 2 prominent females both acknowledged they were attorneys because they weren't very good in math and science. Wow. I'll leave it at that.
We need more attorneys.
I'm a reformed lawyer in my 11th step. So I want everybody else up here is a mathematician. So I just want to get, I want a full disclosure. But I'm in 11th step of the 12-step program.
We'll get you there. We'll get you there.
Anousheh, I wanted to get to you, and then I want to ask Marc a question.
I actually have an answer for how we can change that. If Beyonce stands up and says, I'm great at math and I love math, it changes it. These are the images we portray in the media. It's not just the parents. A lot of parents are supportive of their girls studying STEM education. It's really the way media portrays people of math and science. They're always portrayed as nerds and geeks and people who have zero social life. Girls generally care about their social lives, and they think if I become a student, well, in a different way, but they think that if I become an engineer or computer scientist, or I will be wearing a white lab coat and sitting behind the computer all day long, and I will have zero social life. And that's the media, that's what media portrays, and I think media plays a huge role in changing that image.
Yeah.
And also, going back to the teachers, I think, with my background with the X Prize Foundation, I found that incentives work. And there are those teachers who want to do great things, and I've talked to them. They say, I want to use new material. The school will not allow me to use the new material. I have to go copy it on my own dime and use it in classroom or after classroom, or somehow fit it in without people noticing it. So they're fighting the system, even bringing good things, good material, updated material to the classroom. So we need to, first of all, incentivize those who are trying hard to make a difference, and also allow them to make that difference. We just create a lot of barriers for them instead.
Marc, one of your competitors has a popular T-shirt that I saw someplace. It's a girl's T-shirt that says "Allergic to Algebra." seems to be exactly the opposite way. But
Who was the competitor?
It's look it up. Well, but probably they're not at your level of quality, believe me.
Sure.
But
Of course.
But you raised a point before that I wanted to get back to, and an issue too, is from the private sector. You used the word monetize. In these education gatherings, we almost never hear that word.
Yeah.
But it does have some pretty significant
resonance.
resonance.
It's just being a STEM situation where, you know, you look at the Krebs cycle, everything about the Krebs cycle, and the cycle of taking oxygen and carbon dioxide, and just the biological cycle is all about monetizing and reusing, you know, even your waste. I mean, even our poo is used for the nitrates to break down dead matter. I don't understand why that same ecosystem isn't applied to the business of this industry. You know, it's interesting hearing you talk about the balance in the checkbooks. I'm with you. I think the way we figure that out, obviously, is get the Educational Testing Service to figure out a rubric for that, and maybe then we'd be figuring out how to balance our checkbooks as young people. And I'm obviously being a little bit snarky. The anecdote that you used, I'm just curious, when you videotape, like the kind of alpha teacher, or really maybe beta, internally motivated teacher who's willing to get on video, is that an exercise that you guys came up with on your own in the field?
I think we looked at great schools. What are great schools doing?
Right.
And they're using video, and I think the difference in, you know, Doug Lamab, who's our superintendent managing director, his work, you know, Teach Like a Champion, is there a secret sauce for teachers? How
Did
do you?
you
So he looked at this, and the difference, you know, his innovation was let's take teachers and teaching footage and not watch half an hour.
Sure.
Let's watch game footage. Let's
Right.
watch a 30-second clip of an
Amen.
isolated technique.
Now,
Yeah.
where did you graduate from university?
Goucher College.
And did they teach you that as a best practice? Did they express to you that PD would be?
I was a math major.
Okay. So I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is that if we're going to fix K through 12, we have to address this whole pedagogy issue from K through higher learning. I mean, how is it that we're telling kids you need to be college ready, sending them into a battlefield, knowing that the college might not very well prepare them? Like, these are core issues around the product. I go back to the first thing that I said. It's the product, okay? Steve Jobs didn't need any more data besides a $5 stock, you know, when he came back to Apple from Next Computers, to say, you know what, we better do something different, because you know, we're not going to be around here a year from now if we don't. And that's why they launched the iMac, the iPod, et cetera. That was their data point, okay? So at what point do we we say, you know what, this issue has to be addressed from the core product? Why aren't we teaching kids to balance their checkbooks? Why is it that the ETS is testing or measuring to some other standard besides being gainfully employed? Because if the testing standard was to be gainfully employed, the curriculum would look a lot different.
Wow.
Marc, may I ask you something? And in no way am I putting you on the spot. I'm curious.
Yes.
Would you consider, you're wearing one of your designs, I'm sure.
One of my watches.
Yeah, or the diamond. Would you consider, would you or other manufacturers of fashion consider connecting, when you sell your diamond ring, would you consider?
I don't sell this set.
Okay.
It's a gift. Yeah.
Only
CZ.
Got it.
Strictly
But
CZ. No, kidding.
to relate it to the material, to have a little card saying,
Sure.
and by the way,
I
this
don't
is a
know.
this is how a diamond is.
I launched a program about a decade ago called Sweat Equity Education, C, right? And that's what I'm feeling like a vibe here, right? Because I'm really into the power of the image as a way to onboard the word, okay?
Yeah.
And C has a lot of similar war stories that you are sharing with us in terms of building a product that got Pearson's funding. You know, kind folks from Pearson's Foundation. I met a woman today, and it was a different folks from the foundation, or Kellogg funding, and my own personal funding, me leveraging my relationships in the consumer product industry. The whole thesis was, we're going to onboard learning, okay, and these curriculum interventions around demystifying how product is made, right? Using a shoe and saying this is a last, and this is the midsole and an outsole. And why do you like Air Jordans? Could you design a Jordan? And then discovering and onboarding all these other pieces of curriculum and education, right? Great product, really great evidence, no shelf space. So I've leveraged my relationship. I've gone to Macy's. I've sold a watch product that was designed in a competition by a kid, all right? Where we culled it down from 1,000 kids to this one watch. Just, there's no shelf space to onboard this stuff, inside the school where the consumer is, the consumer being the student. So these are really deep issues. And I know that my tone is a little bit abrasive, and I'm a little bit piss and vinegar, and I apologize for that. But this is frustrating. It's like the most youth unemployment ever on record now. Okay, college business degrees being sold like this, right? More business degrees being sold, but jobs going like this. So there's obviously a core mechanic here that happens to be with the product quality. And are we being genuinely, authentically sober and saying we're just keep pushing our kids, teaching them the same bad habits that we learned? And I'm not saying blow it up. I'm just saying we gotta measure the standard of you know what private industry can do besides philanthropic? Tell the test makers what they should be testing for so that person could go on and have an effective, independent life and being gainfully employed. That's a much different conversation, no disrespect, than calculus. Calculus is a facet of it. It's a different metric.
Mm-hmm. But just to say more, something that businesses can do right now, right away, and would be immensely helpful is to open up their doors to sophomores in college.
Yep.
Let them come in as
sophomores
interns.
in high school.
Even better. Yeah, even better. But an opportunity where they're, and I know we do that, but now I'm talking about scale. Right. So, there's the odd person that does it and so on. And not, I'm teaching Calc 4, ordinary differential equations. On the first day I asked my class, I said, how many here have been in an internship yet? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, no one? No one here has been in an internship with a company? You got to get out into a company right next summer. And so how do you make that, how do you market it at the school? How do you get the companies involved? That's manpower, that's energy, and so on. But schools are starving for it. I mean, the universities want that type of interaction with their students.
Paul Otellini, the CEO of Intel, has challenged the corporate community to double the number of undergraduate internships, and that's part of the Jobs Council work. He's the chair of a subcommittee. And there are companies that are beginning to step up to the plate. And all I can say about high school internships is stay tuned.
Right. This is fascinating and could go on, but we want to get a moment to engage some of the folks in the audience here. So Jim has a microphone, and if we've got some questions, there's a couple right over there, Jim.
Hi, my name is Anousheh Yagubian. I'm from the American Association of University Women. We put out a report in March of 2010 called Why So Few, and we'll be putting out another research report this spring about community colleges in STEM and what works and what is successful. And I still think, though, that there's a general attitude in the public about community colleges that doesn't look at them the same way as four-year institutions. And I was just curious about what your opinions might be about how to change that, and also about how to get industry more involved with community colleges to make that pipeline and sort of plug some of those leaks.
So
Thank
I
you.
can take a first stab at that. The number of, and I don't have the exact statistics because we haven't managed, no one yet has managed to collect them. But for every engineer who's employed, there's like 2.3 engineering technicians. And for every chemist, there's maybe 3.1 chemical technicians. So in fact, if you're looking at the jobs market, there are many jobs that require either a 2-year degree or a series of certificates or a combination of 2-year degrees and certificates. And I would agree that the corporate community hasn't done a good enough job making clear that 2-year degrees are incredibly valuable and pay a very nice living wage. And I definitely agree that we need to do a better job. Some companies are really undertaking innovative ideas. So Dow Chemical, which is located in Michigan, has a relationship with Midland Community College. Governor, you can probably help fill in the details here. But there are 3 chemical companies in this area, and they have a certain ebb and flow in their own workforce needs for chemical technicians. So they have forged a relationship with Midland Community College to have heavier internship components of that 2-year degree when in fact their workforce needs are greater. And it's a real coordinated public-private partnership that's making sure that what these companies need is in fact being generated.
It's critical, and Governor Engler, when he was at the National Association of Manufacturers, really focused on this because to keep manufacturing jobs, we need skilled workers that are going to come from community colleges. But where it really works is where the company is actually giving the curriculum into the community college. You know, I use the reference of Intel. I mean, they literally created the semiconductor manufacturing curriculum, which they give to community colleges and say, these are the gainful employment skills we need to be able to hire a worker. And that's critical. And when every high school graduate is going to have to be to get a certificate or a college or 4-year college degree. It's one or the other, and that's what we've got to prepare students for.
Okay. Question? Yeah, over there, Jim.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Martinez, and I'm a former chemistry and math teacher working at OSTP at the White House. And I was interested because you made reference to the marketplace of ideas and the idea of the educational community not picking up on those. And I think maybe if any of you guys could comment on, Dr. Frankel mentioned students actually talking to their parents about what they learn. And those are 2 very different models of this marketplace of ideas being communicated to schools and students talking to their families. And I wonder if you could comment about the difference of the models of the marketplace and the models of creating a community in schools, and why you think there might be that disconnect between maybe teachers who feel like they are maybe even being marketed to rather than sought out as collaborators.
Anybody got a thought on that? That's a complicated question.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question that does get to the whole parent-teacher responsibility here. Anousheh,
I can start. I don't think you can say one is better than the other and one works better than the other, because it depends on the individual, it depends on the student, the school system, and the parents. You know, I think both are needed definitely for success. Parents have to be engaged, but to be honest with you, in most cases, sometimes parents don't have the right skills. They can just be encouraging, but they don't have the right skills to necessarily be that helpful to their kids, especially in the STEM education. They're willing to be cheerleaders, though, and that the school can engage them in that aspect. As far as the marketplace and getting the teachers engaged, I think the marketplace is ready, willing, and open to get the teachers engaged. I think what teachers face, except for a small group of teachers, they are overworked, have no time and no energy to extend into some of these programs. So that's why they feel sometimes they're being marketed to. And even when they're marketed to, they have no authority to buy the product because they're just told what to do.
I think what's interesting is that there's this disconnect between like the real world and then the world the world of inside the schools, and in terms of the information outlets. It's more of a inbound push if you're a teacher or an operator inside of a school, having to operate your social network within the confines of how your district defines that. But the real world operates on the LinkedIns and the Facebooks of the world, and so there's not like there's not a tidy mechanism that's been adopted, and you get this more inbound solicitation, I would imagine, as an educator. And if you even wanted to showcase and like, where is the marketplace to put it into, right? There's all the COPA rules with, which are good, you know, the government has. But it's going to be interesting what happens because Facebook announced a COPA compliant product that's going to create an ecosystem that has better governance so that these kind of professional conversations around PD stuff, where you have the triumvirate of student, teacher, parent, will start to happen, and hopefully a market will evolve for ideas in those situations.
Good. We've got a couple more questions there, yeah.
Thank you. I feel like that when I was a geeky high school student, because I've been dying to ask this question for about 45 minutes. My name is Julie Staiano. I'm with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and I'm really interested in the panelists' perspectives on whose responsibility it should be to define which are the products that should be taken forward and put on the shelf, so to speak, and then marketing those products. Is there a particular entity? Is it the government? Is it the corporate sector? Or what are the roles then of the various sectors in a perfect world, in your opinions?
When you say products, do you mean physical products or education products?
Education products, whether they be curricula or other ideas.
Okay, ideas in general.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll be starting.
So I think some regulated body needs to be involved in selecting a sort of like an FDA to approve a large set of products that can be marketed first. When they're marketed, I think the teachers can choose what products works for them because they're going to be the ones delivering the product to the student. So I think they should be the ones choosing what product they want to use in the classroom.
But if a teacher doesn't know what they don't know, and we found
they shouldn't be teaching that subject.
But they are teaching.
Well, that's a different problem.
Well, but it's all. This is why it's so complicated.
Yeah, but
it's terrifying that there are science teachers teaching who have no clue what they're
teaching. If you pick a product and you give to the teacher who doesn't know how to teach it, you don't end up with a good result either. So I don't think you need to watch the game because you have teachers who shouldn't be teaching that subject to start with. I definitely think we need to work on how we can bring more content-aware teachers to the classroom. And there's ways to do that, but that's not one way.
We've opened up a whole nother line of inquiry here late in the game, and we're going to have to probably put that on another panel. Does anybody have a quick response? I think the notion of an education FDA of some sort is a pretty fascinating idea.
It's a good idea.
Real quick, anybody have another thought on that?
Well, I could say that in a way an effort was made with the What Works Clearinghouse, and part of the dilemma, this was what, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I'm not exactly sure, is that so few programs were actually clearing that hurdle. So that was a form of the FDA. Our companies in our coalition have said, in a sense, we need help. And so they have created a set of principles and a scoring rubric, the rubric's an odd word to them, to help judge programs, and they have asked us to create a searchable database of effective programs. That process is just getting underway. It's, will all be visible on the website, and I'm finding that it's already changing the conversation because there are program developers who look at this and say, oh, I'm beginning to get what funders are interested in seeing and seeing how well they match that. But it's a work in progress, and frankly, if we come out with one version, it will always benefit from improvements.
Scott, yeah.
And just, on the horizon, the Common Core state standards in mathematics, for example, should provide a fertile, playing field. It will be, you know, they're the standards that 40 states have now adopted. This provides that background or that foundation upon which things like a Facebook or a clearinghouse could actually start to build upon, at least in mathematics, because before, if you wrote something for 3rd grade in Texas, that was it for Texas. Then you had to go to California. That would be a brand new thing in California. So by having this kind of one discussion about what will happen in 40 states or maybe more.
Yeah, it's a great thought. Thank you, Scott. We're going to have to pause there. A very important consensus, I think, on some things and some really great thoughts here. We're going to ask for a wrap-up here. We're going to ask Marilyn Reznick from the AT&T Foundation to give us a couple of final thoughts and maybe sum this up for us.
Thank you, and thank you, panel, for an interesting discussion this morning. AT&T has had a long and deep interest in STEM. That shouldn't be surprising, given the kind of company we are. The STEM disciplines are at the heart of our business. But as we've heard here this morning, these disciplines are going to be vital to every business, no matter the industry, no matter the size. So focusing on STEM education is particularly important at this time. There's also a growing sense of urgency in this country, particularly in the business community, to dramatically improve education here or risk falling further behind other nations. We believe that investing in education is one of the most important things we can do to help America remain a leader in a fiercely competitive global marketplace. That education has to include STEM, not just for some kids, not just for the smartest kids, all kids. All students will need some level of STEM knowledge and skills to succeed. If we're going to reach that goal, one of the things we have to do is deliver that a message across America. That's what makes the U.S. News Initiative so exciting. U.S. News is a very powerful voice that can amplify the issues, the needs, the opportunities. They can expand this dialogue beyond the usual circle of friends represented here to reach millions of Americans, to raise awareness, to increase understanding, to indeed call this country to action, to advance the work we must all do to bring STEM education to all students. I want to thank U.S. News, and Brian, I particularly want to thank you. It's your passion, your commitment, and your leadership that has helped launch this very exciting endeavor. Thank you for letting us be a part of it. Thank you.
All right, now I'm really on the spot. Marilyn, thank you, and thank the folks from Dell, and I agree with you that these kinds of partnerships, the ability for us to bring together great companies, great talents, great minds, and many of the people who are represented here, I know, represent larger organizations that have great reach as well. We are committed to this issue. We think this is a really important space where we can play a role. By no means the only role. We do have that ability to bring people into our tent, as you can see this morning, and it makes us very happy to be able to do that and do what we can to project this. But we sure are not pretending to do this alone, and we will look forward to getting together with everyone here in various other things going forward. We're looking at some bigger events next year. Stay tuned for that. And some other partnerships that we're going to be able to put together to help this issue. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed this panel as much as I did and learned something. Terrific people, great insights. Thank you.